So usually I try not to have something as dangerous as an opinion, but you don't play a mod for over 300 hours without developing a few of your own. So here's my thoughts following the end of my Odyssean journey. This is a bit difficult because the mod itself says it's still an alpha, so for all I know everything I'm going to bring up will be changed or is already planned to be changed. But I guess if you're going to critique anything, alpha's the time to do it. Now there's way too many people on YouTube who assume that their opinions are A, useful, or B, desired, and at risk of adding myself to that pool, I'd like to preface this whole thing by saying that this isn't my mod and he can do whatever the hell he wants with it. Also, keep in mind that the tone of my voice makes me sound about 10 times as negative as I actually feel, but anyway, to give the long and short of it, space exploration is the most technically and visually impressive mod that Factorio has to offer. The skill and talent is apparent, and the existence of the completely unique logistical challenges like cargo rockets, space elevators, and starships is just astonishing. There is so much I absolutely love about this mod that I'll miss. I expect for months to come I'll still find myself hitting N to try and enter satellite view in vanilla. However, allow me to gently insert the knife that I'll be twisting until the end of this video, because there's a lot I didn't like as well. But only identifying negatives is the mark of the worst kind of critic, and so I'll start out by addressing what I think works. From the beginning, space exploration doesn't overwhelm you. The gameplay is mostly vanilla and slowly ramps up in difficulty, but is different enough from vanilla to make you need to switch up your base a bit. Things like green circuits taking stone instead of iron and the introduction of glass are small but welcome changes, as well as expanded uses for sulfur and batteries. The extended burner phase can drag a bit, but it's such an insignificant portion given the scope of the mod, it's easy to forget. The beacon and module changes are great, and probably the best way he could have handled balancing scaling late game. Other mods will introduce upgrades like chemical plants 2 and 3s in the same vein as assembling machines, because without the ability to upgrade old builds, you'd have no flexibility when demand suddenly increases later in the game. Having 3 or more variants of every building is just bloat, and so instead having one building that offers a flat upgrade to every building evenly is much cleaner. Obviously it's no substitute for good builds, but it's a video game. Optimal play shouldn't be forced. The beacon overloading mechanic is great as well, since it doesn't pigeonhole you into the same 10 beacon build for literal days. When you first get into space and find the ruins, that's great. The fact that you can scavenge several very powerful buildings you won't get until literal hundreds of hours later not only provides their utility, but also lends a mystique to the mod. You like these items? Well, one day you'll be able to make them. It's a dynamic that doesn't really exist in any other Factorio mod, or if it does, I'm wholly unaware of it. The idea of scavenge technology lends well to the concept of space exploration, and the existence of an underlying story you can uncover through gameplay isn't present at all in the base game. The biggest defining feature of space exploration is its multi-surface logistics. Cargo rockets, spaceships, and space elevators all serve to move items from one surface to another, and a lot of the game is balanced around this feature. It's SE's most unique challenge, and in my opinion the mod is at its best when you're conquering other planets and setting up isolated bits of manufacturing. Arriving at nothing and leaving with a factory hard at work is peak Factorio, and you get to do it multiple times. It's also great for multiplayer because with a mod as long as space exploration, you can send one guy to deal with one resource while you handle something else. It's a similar story with the parallel science paths, and I think this was intentional. The concept of completely self-sufficient and isolated bases is probably my favorite part of the space exploration geist. And here comes the knife. Yes, it is an incredibly impressive mod, but it feels like it's lacking cohesion or awareness of what it even is. It feels more like a collection of extremely cool features clumsily tied together because it's more interesting to add new features than to tweak existing ones, which I can totally understand, but this is how you get feature creep or indefinite release dates a la Star Citizen. Not that a free mod is beholden to anyone, but the point stands. So going back to multi-surface logistics, I'd like to posit the existence of a Factorio fun factor, the mysterious variable that determines how fun playing Factorio is. Obviously, if I could define such a thing, I wouldn't need to be making YouTube videos, but it seems reasonable to break it into the categories: problem solving, efficiency, advancement, and aesthetics. Advancement and aesthetics this mod has in spades, but the problem solving fun factor is principal in its importance. This is what most mods seek to add: more complex problems to solve and more ways to solve problems. Mods like Angels, Nullius, or Industrial Revolution all involve complex crafting chains and multi-step processes, and there's a lot of interplay between recipes. Interplay between recipes, that's the important part. That's because they don't have to deal with one very important feature: multi-surface logistics. That's right, space exploration's core philosophy is also what precludes it from having these complex recipe chains, which is evident if you look at any of the chains for the extraterrestrial materials. They are very linear, taking only small amounts of materials to go from one step to the next. To make holmium, you crush it, then you combine it with cryonite, then you combine it with copper, then you combine it with vulcanite, and then you combine it with sand. Each step just adds one thing, but never in volumes you can't just ship in from your main base. So you get this whole situation where your bases are technically isolated, but still totally dependent on some central hub for basic supplies. All the materials are like this, separate and completely linear, limited in their complexity to their isolation, but not isolated enough to make sourcing materials locally an interesting challenge. They can't play together because that would require working around the multiple surfaces too much and launching too many rockets, so they just exist in this so-so state. Because of this, all the complexity of the material needs to come from the process itself and not manufacturing its ingredients or dealing with its byproducts. Except the only real complexity you can eke out of this is routing the output back in as input. Every single material does this, and the answer is always a priority input splitter every time. That's not to say that complexity is strictly better. I actually thought that the version 0.5 recipes were better because they were simpler instead of pretending to be complex in the most annoying way possible. And don't even get me started on the byproducts. Why does everything give out stone and sand? It's honestly baffling how much effort can be present in the rest of the mod, and yet something as straightforward as a waste management mechanic can hang off like a vestigial limb. Which makes even less sense considering there's a proper scrapping mechanic in space, but even that you can just turn into landfill. If the answer is to turn the byproduct into landfill, then put it into a box and forget about it, the byproduct shouldn't even be there in the first place. For all its flaws, the mod Nullius has the best implementation of a waste system I've seen, and I'd like to see SE take some notes. The fact that there's a building almost entirely dedicated to turning stuff you don't want into landfill is just... I don't know, it just smacks of this non-committal attitude I get off of so much of it. Core mining in particular is hilarious because it's the only way to get certain resources that the planet is lacking, and yet what it spits out the most of is the stuff that's most abundant. In my humblest opinion, I would like to see it fully embrace the multi-surface logistics instead of being caught between it and conventional Factorio. That means more isolated, more specialized factories localized entirely on one planet, requiring less from the outside world but more effort to build. The easiest way to achieve that would be to simply introduce a lot more unique fluids, since they're difficult to transport via rocket, but requiring a restrictively large amount of raw materials would work too. The best way, however, in my opinion, would be to pull down some of the science from space and onto specific planets. Justify it by saying you need their atmosphere or magnetosphere or something. One of the main problems is that each planet is unique, but also lacks at least one of the primary resources. This would actually be an interesting problem to solve, but there's no way to actually solve it apart from shipping it in from outside. If there were some mechanic to filter trace amounts of iron from sand, extract dust from ore, compress organics into coal, just any sort of inefficient but feasible way to get what you need, then there would be some interesting challenge there. But as it stands, the answer is to just ship it in from outside. Now, I'm hesitant to give this kind of criticism because it's pretty easy to just point and say, make more content, and lots of these things are probably on the roadmap anyway. But you could also add planet-specific challenges or advantages like lakes of free sulfuric acid or dirty water you need to clean before using. Anything really. It would add to this idea of conquering worlds instead of just landing on them to get the one resource you need to arbitrarily unlock the next science. Since half the time it's easier to just mine it there and immediately ship it to Nalvis and eat the shipping costs. As it stands, because Nalvis has every important resource, you can just ship in everything you need from Nalvis and immediately invalidate any possible planet-specific challenge. Core mining in general feels like a bandage solution to something that shouldn't even exist. The real use of core mining is to give you a small but infinite supply of resources, which wouldn't be necessary if not for the mechanic that keeps ore richness the same across the whole planet. The existence of this mechanic makes you think it's trying to encourage you to get resources from other planets, but no, getting everything from Nalvis is all around superior. I sourced all my ingots from other planets purely because I thought it was cool, not because I thought it was the best solution or anything. If you want one quote to take away from this, it would be that in space exploration, fun is optional and very inefficient. There's all those menu simulations showing neat concepts like conquering a planet remotely with a Spidertron, or landing a spaceship on a planet with biters at the gates to supply pyroflux to an array of flamethrowers, but you will never encounter the need for anything like that. Getting a little bit harsh here, so it's probably time to remind you that I still thought the mod was good. But that being said, having seen the mod progress from 0.5 to 0.6, it just seemed to entrench itself further in all the things I personally disagree with. Keywords, personally. Maybe you love it, maybe the mod creator thinks it's already perfect. It's just my opinion. Anyway, as for the actual space sciences, there's no real way for me to say it other than I just didn't like them. The catalog's insight and significant data are interesting when you first look at it, but by the time I finished the second path of science, I'd already mentally checked out. 80 different data cards, and they're all basically the same. Most of them are only made in one building each and have relatively small input requirements, yet the buildings are enormous. Building anything that looks halfway decent in space is more of a challenge than the mod itself. The biggest problem with space science is that it means menuing is a significant portion of the time it takes to actually build anything. Not thinking of belt placement or inserter designs, selecting different recipes and setting up filters on filter inserters. And because they take so many different but uninteresting things, the designs are all fundamentally unblueprintable. By the time you've visited the requisite planets to get all the new resources, you never need to think about other planets again, at least until you get Naquium. And so the next 100 hours is mostly spent being bored in space. Some people call me a masochist, but late-game space exploration is like getting stuck in traffic. Yeah, it's torture, but not the kind that would titillate anyone. Obvious exception being arcospheres. They're an interesting and unique challenge that wholly deserves to be the final obstacle. I've already advocated pulling a lot of the space sciences down to individual planets, maybe the first tier with the other tiers being made out of the first, but there's not much else I can suggest on the subject of the space science track that wouldn't mean completely redoing it. And that's pretty unreasonable considering the amount of effort that clearly went into it. But to me, the massive space buildings are practically begging for some 10+ input recipe that combines all the products of your individual planetary bases into one super processed material. Now, for a mod that calls itself space exploration, there's a shocking lack of exploring space. There's a few ruins, but they have little practical benefit, and by the time you're free to actually explore them, you're probably already near completion. There's the pyramids, but those are only useful if you're doing the secret ending. Yeah, the mod is still an alpha, and yeah, more is planned, but it's already got more effort in it than almost any other mod, and it feels like if it was meant to be a core mechanic, it would have been in place from the start. It's actually surprising to me that instead of high-leveled modules, there aren't alien artifacts hidden inside the pyramids that serve as science packs in some alien lab to gate entire branches of research under the concept of uncovering lost technology. The dimensional anchor research only appears when you visit the anomaly for the first time, so there's no reason something like antimatter engines couldn't be considered advanced alien technology and require advanced alien artifacts to begin research. Again, I know more is planned, so I'm not going to pan too much on the fact that planets outside of your solar system are absolutely worthless and asteroid fields that don't have Naquium in them might as well not exist. And I am legitimately excited to see where this mod goes. It has mechanics other mods could only dream of, but for all the exciting features, it consistently feels like the progression and recipes are left neglected. Okay, if you want my radical opinion, and obviously you do if you've made it this far, the start of space exploration should be completely different. Now, V's shouldn't be your de facto hub, and it shouldn't be unique in that it's the only planet with all the basic resources. It should just be another planet. Instead of the vanilla crashed spaceship, replace it with the mod's own spaceship like the broken one around the asteroid belt and make the goal of the early game research to repair it and gain the ability to visit other planets. This might sound crazy, but I don't think we even need cargo rockets, at least not at the start. Maybe research them after conquering your second planet and limit them to only within the solar system. If you centralize more of the game around spaceships, exploration will naturally follow, but as it stands, you don't even need to use spaceships until Naquitite. I think there needs to be more varied planet bases, and treat space as the point where all your bases converge. There's a lot more I could say, but I'm not going to wax endlessly about something I fundamentally have no control over. These are just my thoughts after playing it, and ultimately all of my suggestions are simply the way I'd pull it closer to my personal preferences as opposed to that of the mod maker. Also, spitballing ideas is much easier than actually implementing them. If I had to guess, everything I've mentioned is either a planned feature or will be summarily ignored. And that's fine, but regardless, hopefully you found my ramblings interesting. Okay, bye.